We are going to sew the Billie jacket today. This is View B, also referred to as the simplified version. I am using bias binding instead of facing, and the construction of the jacket is more suited for a beginner. For the fabric, I've linked it below. It is from Joann Fabrics and a wonderful fabric to sew with. I've really enjoyed the end product. I've also linked similar floral fabric below along with all the supplies you need and the pattern to the Billie jacket. Before you begin sewing, make sure to mark any notches, pocket placement, and button placement that is marked on your pattern. First, prepare your bias binding. If you're using pre-made binding, you can skip this step. There are tools to make bias binding out there. I like to use pins and an ironing board, folding the bias binding myself. To make a lot of binding at once, cut a large square measuring 18 by 18 inches for the children's size and 24 by 24 inches for the women's size. Cut the square in the middle along the diagonal line. Flip the fabric right sides together, aligning the long, straight edge of the triangles. Sew at 1/4 of an inch and press the seam open. On the wrong side of the fabric, mark the width of your bias tape with a water-soluble pin. For the Billie jacket, we are using a 2-inch bias tape. Starting at the bottom of the rhombus shape, draw a line every 2 inches and cut off the excess at the top. Now align the lines you just created, offsetting the lines by 1. Sew at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and press the seam open. Following the drawn lines, cut the bias tape in a continuous swoop. You'll end up with a very long bias tape. Now at the ironing board, lay the bias tape with the wrong side facing up. Fold the tape in thirds and insert a pin covering the bias tape while leaving a gap for the tape to flow through freely. Carefully iron the fabric as it flows through the pins to create the tape. As you gently pull, it should automatically fold the fabric. Adjust as you need and then fold the tape once more and press to finish preparing the binding. You'll use this for the pocket, jacket, and sleeves. Take the pockets and place them in front of you, right sides facing up. Starting at the bottom of the pocket, line up one of the edges of the binding and pin in place. Pin around the pocket and allow the binding to overlap once you reach the beginning of where you attach the bias tape. Trim the excess binding. Starting 1 inch away from the edge of the tape, sew at 1/2 inch along the creased line. When you are almost back at the beginning, fold the end of the bias 1/2 inch with the wrong sides touching. Finish sewing the binding where the stitches began and backstitch. Press the binding towards the back of the pocket and fold the remaining bias tape towards the back. Press to help keep it in place and pin if needed. Carefully stitch in the ditch to secure the bias. This is going to carefully just stitch right along the bias tape to secure it in place. Repeat this for the other pocket. Starting at the top corner where the pocket opens, sew around the pocket right along the edge of the bias tape. Finish on the other corner where the pocket opens and backstitch to secure. Repeat this for the other pocket. Set the front panels aside for now and take out the back yoke and back piece. Along the top of the back piece, create a gather stitch. You can do this by turning up the tension and stitch length on your machine and sewing at 1/4 inch. Do not backstitch because you will need this to adjust the gathers. To adjust the gathers, grab the bobbin thread of one side of the pattern piece and gently pull the fabric. Pull until it is the width of the back yoke and the gathers are distributed evenly. Right sides facing, pin the back piece to the back yoke using the notches as a guide. Sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Finish the raw seam with a serger and press the seam upwards towards the yoke. This is optional, but you can top stitch the seam at 1/8 inch for a finished look. Grab your front and back pieces. Right sides together, match the right shoulders together and the left shoulders together. Stitch at 1/2 inch. Finish the seams and press the seams towards the back. Unpin your sleeves and mark the dart points. Right sides together, stitch your darts closed at a 1/2 inch. Taper off at a point once you get to the end of your dart by lowering the stitch length. Using the excess thread, make a knot to secure the stitches. Repeat this for all of the darts. Right sides together, pin your sleeves into the armhole of your top using the notches as a guide. Use as many pins as you need to pin in the rest of your sleeve. Sew this at a 1/2 inch. Finish the seam and press away from the sleeve. Optional, you can top stitch this at 1/8 inch. Repeat this for the other sleeve. Right sides together, pin your front and back side seams together on both sides of your top. Match the corner of your sleeve edge, your armpit seam, and the corners at the bottom portion of your jacket. Sew at a 1/2 inch. Starting at the bottom side seam, pin the bias binding around the perimeter of the jacket with the right sides facing. Begin sewing 1 inch from the edge of the beginning of the binding using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When you're almost back to the beginning, fold the end of the edge a 1/2 inch with the wrong sides touching. Finish sewing the binding where the stitches began and backstitch. Press the binding towards the wrong side of the jacket and fold the remaining bias tape towards the back. Press to help keep it in place and pin if needed. Carefully stitch in the ditch to secure the bias to the jacket. Sew the bias binding to the edge of the sleeves using the same technique you used for the pockets and binding the edges of the jacket. Now for adding snaps, I chose to use these brass Tandy leather snaps. I use them for a lot of my jackets and they work really well. For the snaps, you'll mark the placement of the buttons with a water-soluble pen and using a pointed tool or hole punch, create a hole for the snaps. Making sure I'm aligning the snaps as the package instructs, I'm going to use a hammer to set them into place. Give your jacket a good press and it is now complete. This is going to keep you cozy all fall and winter long, and you can create the matching version for adults, and the pattern is linked below. If you're looking for the View A version of the Billie jacket, you can click this next video.